Hi, folks. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us. My name is Laurel Bellman. I'm an event manager at Do It. And I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session, Student Supervision and Leadership Development with Kari Temkin. So we're going to have some time at the end for questions, and please feel free if you're attending this session virtually to put those questions in the chat and I will read them out. And if you're attending here in person, just raise your hand and I will walk the microphone over to you and then you can go ahead and ask your question and Kari will definitely answer it for you. She's got all the answers, don't you? All right. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kari.
Thank you very much, Laurel. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And hello to those joining virtually. My name is Kari Temkin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Student Experience Manager in the Office of Student Financial Aid. Now, you may be wondering, why the heck is someone in the Office of Student Financial Aid here talking with you? And that's because the student employment team who helps oversee student employment for our entire university is housed in the Office of Student Financial Aid. And one part of my portfolio is supporting student employment. So that's what brings me here. And also, I'll be talking about a program that we launched several years ago called Engage Leaders Through Employment. And it's a partnership between the student employment team and the Center for Leadership and Involvement. But before I dive into the actual program, I want to capture the why behind why I'm even here talking about leadership and student employment. I know that there's a lot of student employees who support IT work across campus in a variety of different settings and areas. Just to get a better sense of who's physically in the room, and if you're virtual, you can pop in the chat. How many of you supervise students? Majority of you. Good, because that's the audience that we're talking to here. That's a good sign. So the why from the student employment lens, there's a lot of research that backs this up. So I want to couch our conversation in some of that research. Dr. Savaka and Krager say that there is no person, procedure, nor guidebook that can impact a student employee's experience more than the supervisor. Now, I titled this Student Employment Team's Why, the Data and the Duh. I think many of us who have had a supervisor or are supervisors understand the relevance of that statement, right? And a supervisor can help influence a student's experience and make it menial or meaningful. And that also came out of the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators Employing Student Success report. They said that the extent to which supervisors are supported can determine whether an employment experience is meaningful or meaningful. So that's where the student employment team in the Office of Student Financial Aid comes in. We're really trying to ramp up the support that is available to supervisors across campus as well. And this program is born out of that too. And lastly, we know that intentional reflection works and is a mechanism to turn a student employment opportunity from a punch in, punch out, transactional to a really transformative and learning opportunity. And one of the ways that we know that on top of the research is that we have We Grow on our campus, Wisconsin Guided Reflection on Work. And that helps students identify the transferable skills that they're learning. And in our student employment survey, those results show that students who had We Grow conversations reported higher engagement year after year after year in that survey, and a 10% or greater increase in job satisfaction than their peers. And this is right out of the data from our own campus as well. And then the why from the Center for Leadership and Involvement standpoint comes from the nitty-gritty of leadership development. They engage in the multi-institutional study of leadership. This is a study that's exactly what the title indicates it is. It happens every 3 years, and our university has been a part of it for over a decade. And this last iteration showed that some college environments, and again, I don't think any of this is like mind-boggling or mind-blowing, but it showed that some college environments, such as community service, student orgs, mentoring, and specific leadership training were strongly associated with higher leadership outcome scores. However, and this was, I think, the surprising part from our team anyway, we learned that high impact learning experiences, and this is the piece that I want to make the point of, work for pay, so student employment, were not strongly associated with leadership outcome scores. That's pretty surprising. But what we learned from this is that we have an opportunity to pull what does work into the student employment context and incorporate those experiences that are strongly associated with leadership outcome into high impact learning experiences and work experiences. So that is the background of why ELE came to exist, engage leaders through employment. And this is supporting employers. So this goes back to that piece of the amount of support that supervisors get. So supporting employers in creating and sustaining a work culture that values student leadership development through the integration of the UW-Madison leadership framework and best practices across campus. So I'm going to dive into a little bit of the why even further. I already talked about the data, but really engaging in leadership development with our student employees is an investment in our student development and success. The data also shows that students who engage in high impact practices are more likely to succeed while they're here and graduate, elevate student leadership as a whole, increase buy-in and productivity of our employees, create meaning to help reduce turnover, which helps us in our jobs, right? And support career preparedness as well. So the mission mentions that it integrates the UW-Madison leadership framework. How many of you have seen or heard of the leadership framework? So not many. That's great. Good. Welcome. A tool that you can use. UW-Madison leadership framework. This was developed in 2012, and it's gone through iterations over time. And really it's formulated on, well, the background here is that a bunch of employers after college, like where students would get employed, said, UW-Madison students are awesome. They're just such great leaders. But UW-Madison didn't have a shared understanding of what leadership was. So based on research and theory and also the Wisconsin experience is what guides and the background of the leadership framework. And there's 4 grounding principles. The first is that leadership is not based on a title. It is action oriented. It's a behavior that's exhibited. Next is that context matters. So how a student is a leader at work is different than how they may be a leader in their intramurals or how they may be a leader in the classroom. It's culturally responsive and has a responsibility to uplift and uphold voices that have historically been intentionally marginalized or silenced. And lastly, the whole point in leadership is for positive change. And the leadership framework has 3 values and 7 competencies. Based on the time that we have together today, I'm not going to dive deep into this, but I do have some handouts for those who are in person, and there's also the link in the chat for those who are joining virtually as well to dive into that. Another tangible resource that I want to make sure that you're aware of is the leadership certificate on campus. This is a co-curricular certificate that's available to undergraduate and graduate students as well. And it's a formal acknowledgement of their learning, their contributions, their achievements. Many students are just in their day-to-day life and their student engagements are already meeting most of the requirements of the leadership certificate, but it helps them make meaning out of that leadership. So it fully integrates the leadership framework into it. There's involvement hours, and this is the piece where their student employment comes in. Just by being a student, they are meeting the involvement hours if what they're doing is exhibiting leadership for the leadership certificate. There's a reflection partner. There's some educational requirements. And again, most students are already taking these courses anyway to meet that requirement. And then there's reflection essays and presentations to make meaning out of that experience. So I want to highlight the framework and the leadership certificate because these are resources for you to know about and to use to integrate into the student employment experience. So what are we talking about when we're talking about ELE? First, we want to acknowledge that student supervisors have so much on their plates. I don't need to tell you that, right? If you're a supervisor, you know what your day-to-day looks like. And for many of us, student supervision is just one little nugget of that. So the approach of ELE, Engage Leaders Through Employment, is to make it a choose your own adventure, kind of dip your toe in, see what works for you in your own context. So we have a tiered approach. The first tier is really just communicating about the leadership opportunities that are on campus and also helping students reframe their thinking around what leadership is and help them see themselves as leaders. Tier 2 gets a little bit more intentional in integrating experiences into their student employment landscape. And Tier 3 is all in. Leadership is how we do student employment. So I'll dive a little bit more deeply into Tier 1 and Tier 2 in our time today. So Tier 1 is focused again on communicating that to students that what they're doing through their jobs is leadership. And oftentimes students have this view of leadership that it's very based on a title, that it's who is the loudest, who's up front. And so this is an opportunity to have those conversations with our students to help reframe their understanding of what being a leader is and how to practice that. And also raising their awareness of the leadership certificate on campus. So if you have trainings during your student onboarding or all staff trainings throughout the year, for instance, that touch on leadership development, those trainings can count toward the requirement of the leadership certificate. So it's a twofer for them. So communicating that is helpful. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, explaining that their work hours as they're exhibiting leadership behavior counts toward the leadership certificate. So you might be wondering, well, what counts as leadership? What is that? And that's really where I'd invite you to take a peek and a deeper dive into the leadership framework to use some of that language. Here are just some examples. Oftentimes we talk about customer service, especially at the front desk, right? The help desk. Well, let's tease that apart a little bit. Customer service is also about integrity. It's interpersonal communication, bridge building, collaboration. So it just provides, like at the very base level, the leadership framework provides a different lens through which to talk about the work that your students are doing to help see themselves as leaders. Same with problem solving. I won't dive too, you can read. And this is available on the website as well. Tier 2 is where we're really bringing in intentionality and leadership development opportunities specifically into how your students are doing their work. So some examples of that are looking at your onboarding. The Center for Leadership and Involvement has a free, not just to campus folks, but off campus as well, a free online leadership self-assessment tool. Your students, as part of their onboarding, could utilize or could take this leadership self-assessment tool, and you could use that as a topic of conversation as they're developing their goals for the year. You could use that in group conversations to see how some folks have strengths in some areas and some have strengths in other areas and what that means as they're working together. Part of the leadership certificate has the educational component. Part of that outside of coursework are an opportunity to look at TED Talks that have to do with leadership. You could look at what the TED Talks are as part of that leadership certificate. If it's applicable to your work, which most of them are applicable to anyone's work, I would argue, consider having that as part of their onboarding. And that's another opportunity both to help them in their actual skill development for the role that they have, but also another one of those twofers where they're doing something for their job to help them be a better employee, to help them be a better human, but also they're checking a box for the leadership certificate as well. Looking at formal evaluations, you could incorporate language straight from the leadership framework into that evaluation as students are doing self-appraisals, as you're doing evaluations for them as well. And also the leadership framework is a great tool to help them articulate what they're doing in their job on a resume and articulate what they're doing in a job through an interview as well. Part of formal evaluations is the gift of learning how to give and receive feedback. Many of us don't learn this ever. Some of us don't learn it until, today. So it's really a gift to have that experience with our students at that young professional stage. Thinking about recognition, participation in the leadership certificate could be a consideration for pay raise or promotion, depending on what your structure is in your office or in your unit. And again, incorporating leadership language into the requirements or nominations for awards, if you have any awards for students through their work as well. Tier 3, I'm not going to dive deeply into. It's quite expansive. I thought I would take more time. I didn't want to go over the 20 minutes, but to get connected. So really tier 3 is about incorporating leadership development in even throughout the entire student life cycle. So that starts even with the job posting. So how does your job posting show that you value leadership development and you are contributing to that in the student employment experience? And integrating it into your check-ins and any experience that they have throughout leadership development. And then also a piece of tier 3 is civic engagement as well, because that is another component of the leadership certificate. So I want to share that, this is just a teaser of what this program has to offer. Folks at the Center for Leadership and Involvement and myself and people on in the student employment team do one-on-one consultations. So we can sit down with you, learn more about your student employment landscape, see how what your students are doing is already leadership development, and coach and have a conversation around how to further integrate leadership development in the student employment context. So I'll leave this up here for a moment. I saw some people taking pictures, and the link is in the chat as well for that. I mentioned earlier that supervisors are so key to the student employment experience. Something I also want to mention is that I think often we don't take the time to think about, at least I didn't, as student supervisors, we might be the single non-student adult who sees that student the most throughout the school year. It's not their professors that they see the most. It's not their TAs. It's not their academic advisors. You might be the adult that they see most consistently. And so that brings with it some awesome connection opportunities, but also some responsibility too, right? We can help be a safety net for our students as it relates to belonging, safety, well-being, and also giving them access to professional development resources. So part of our offerings for supervisors include a resource drive. So the QR code and then also the link in the chat shows the student employment website that has several different resources for our student supervisors. The resource drive is actually filled with tangible, actual resources that have been put in there from student supervisors all across campus in every nook and cranny. If you're looking for sample interview questions, job descriptions, and obviously those are all context specific, but to see what other folks are doing across campus, evaluations, inclusive employment practices, it's all in the resource drive, which is super cool. And if you have something that you want to share with others as well, I really encourage you to drop it in that drive too. If you haven't accessed that before, you'll need to get permission. Really, it's just somebody in our office saying, yes, you're from UW, come in. But just want to give you a heads up. Also, we do have a student supervisor community of practice, acknowledging that student supervision is a really niche experience on campus. It gives folks an opportunity to come together, troubleshoot, share best practices, be in community with one another. It started last year and it has gotten a lot of traction. We have over 140 student supervisors in the Teams channel and on our listserv. If you're interested in getting connected with that, the information is also on the website too. Our next community of practice gathering is virtual. We have our in-person meetings during nicer weather, so then we could go to the terrace after. and virtual when it's cold. So January 16th from 10 to 11:30. And our topic, because we have different topics every gathering, is inclusive student employment practices. So I hope to see you there. And then also want to shout out National Student Employee Appreciation Week. That is April 14th to the 18th. And there's several different events that are held all across campus free of charge for student employees to uplift and acknowledge the work that they do for our whole campus. Because if we're being honest, our campus could not run without our student employees, right? So we want to appreciate them. With that, we have time for questions.
Hi there. Hold on one second. We have a question in the room.
Hi, at where I work for the libraries, we have about 55 students in our department that help run a variety of our desks. And one of the things that we have recently is students, we have a hierarchy. So we have Tech 1, Tech 2, Tech Advanced, and then we have our leads. And typically our Tech 1 is only for training, but our Tech 2 and up is where students typically tend to stay for the majority of their tenure with us. How should we offer leadership roles to students who believe that they should be higher in their position when we as supervisors don't see that initiative or that leadership has been taken? Like, is there any suggestions you would have for us?
So my understanding of the question is there's a disconnect between what they think that they're doing or how they're exhibiting leadership and should be advanced versus the interpretation of their work. So there's a disconnect there. And I think that's where those intentional conversations come in the one-on-one check-ins, and also embedding an evaluation process too, so that you can have a real conversation and really flip it on the student and have the student be charged with sharing the story of their leadership. And often through that conversation, and you can pull the leadership framework and give it to them and say, here's what the library, like, this is our approach to leadership. This is what we think of when we talk about leadership. Here are the principles, here's some values, here are some competencies. Tell us, because that gives them an opportunity to really reflect on their work honestly with some guided help. And then that gives you a framework to engage in that conversation too, to then have some goal setting afterward. And also, maybe it opens your eyes to the work that they're doing that you didn't actually think about as leadership too. So it could be a reciprocal learning in that environment as well. I know that that's really vague and broad, and it's going to be specific per student. But often I think in these conversations, we forget the agency of the student in that, or feel like the onus is on us to be like, no, this is what it should look like, or this is what you're doing, this is what you need to do. But giving them that opportunity, that agency to do that self-reflection, I think is a core first step. Does anyone else have any recommendations?
As we wait for some more questions, can you give some examples of some of the activities that happen during Student Employee Appreciation Week?
I would love to. So it kicks off with the banquet where there's Student Employee of the Year awards that are given out. Those nominations have since closed, so that's something to keep an eye on. And if you're in the community of practice, you'll get all the communications for that. So it starts off with the banquet, but then we just had a conversation about planning it this morning. Last year, I'll share, there was ice skating at the Baki with pizza. There was trivia with nachos, free professional headshots, which is an awesome thing to access as a student. Bowling at the set. Everything has food, so that's a good thing. And a couple years ago, we had the big ribbit thing, the water obstacle course at the Nick. So a variety of different things. And we're talking about doing a sip and paint, not with wine. If you have ideas, let us know.
All right, my question, So my question is that, I'm just gonna start supervising students. We haven't had students since the pandemic, so, and then there was like one. So it was a little different. Now we're gonna be hiring in a team and start to utilize student employees to help us with our desktop support.
Yeah.
Where would you suggest would be the best place as a starting point for resources, so I get them started well instead of
I love that. My first advice is to consider the whole student employee life cycle and not as an afterthought. So you're already doing that. You're welcome to reach out to us. We're happy to have a one-on-one conversation with you, but that resource drive is a great place to start, because it's the folders are based on different categories as well that might just guide the way that you're thinking about what it looks like. And when I talk about the student employee life cycle, I'm thinking about how do they engage with the job from the moment that it's posted? What is the application process? What are the questions that they're answering in their interview process? And thinking about it similarly to how we talk about professional staff recruitment and onboarding, because just like you're recruiting them, they're interviewing you as well when they have so many other options across campus and off campus too. So thinking about it from like, how can we give gifts to one another, I think is a good starting spot.
Another question. Can you share any examples of any stories that you might have of a student's leadership journey, how they've developed through this program that you've heard?
Several years ago, I worked at the Mortgage Center for Public Service, and I had student interns, and we incorporated leadership development through that process, including the leadership certificate for part of their internship. And because of those conversations that we had ongoing, we always had these conversations, these reflective conversations around leadership and what they're learning, the skills they're developing. When she graduated, she was applying to several different opportunities, and she shared with me that she turned down a position because of how they were talking about leadership and the words that, like the type of words that they were using when they were talking about leadership in that interview process. So not only did going through the it wasn't called ELE at that point, but not only did going through the leadership certificate for her help her identify her own values, who she wants to be as a leader, but it also reciprocally helped her understand what she values in a workplace as well. And I thought that was so cool. Like what an awesome skill to have so young in your career. She was able to identify red flags because of going through the leadership development process, which is really neat.
I don't know if this question is too soon, but in the survey that you cited toward the beginning of your presentation, where student employment was not reflected in as a foundational piece of leadership,
Yeah.
I wonder if you're seeing movement on that through the work that the group is doing, or if you're expecting to, or what that would look like. What are you hoping to build here?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. It is too soon to see, but that is one of the indicators that we're looking at, is the year after year shift in those questions on that multi-institutional study of leadership. Certainly, ELE as a whole, our goal is like our big hairy audacious goals is down the road. Student employment is the same as leadership development, right? Student employment is a high impact practice. It's just how we do student employment. And also to uplift the value of student supervision across campus as well, because that's often a under-recognized profession, skill, talent. So that's also the another lens through which we're trying to build up ELE too.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that's about all the time we have. But thank you so much. This was a really great presentation, really engaging. For those of you who are attending virtually, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you here in the room, thank you for joining us. We've got lots of great sessions coming up still. So thank you very much.
Thank you.